The WNBA's officiating establishment just got caught on camera doing something so blatant, so undeniable, so absolutely indefensible, that even the people trying to cover it up couldn't keep their stories straight. Caitlin Clark, the biggest star this league has seen in a generation, is being treated by a different set of rules than everyone else on that floor. Not as a theory, not as a feeling, as documented, on-camera, referee-confirmed fact. And the media apparatus that is supposed to hold this league accountable just sent two of its voices onto national television to gaslight every single person who watched those games with their own eyes. Welcome back. This is Rimrun, and today we are ripping the doors off the double standard that the WNBA's officiating establishment and its media defenders are desperately trying to normalize. Because what happened on ESPN and what happened on that court with Paige Bueckers and Kaylin McBride walking around clapping in people's faces without a single technical foul called is the clearest proof yet that Caitlin Clark is operating inside a league that has decided the rules do not apply to everyone equally. Let me be entirely clear with you right now before we go any further. There are two separate scandals running simultaneously in this story, and they are both catastrophic for the credibility of this league. The first is what Nneka Ogwumike did on ESPN, on national television with cameras rolling, in front of every fan who loves this game, when she sat at that desk and used the word embellish in connection with Caitlin Clark taking physical contact. The second is what WNBA referees did on the court when Paige Bueckers clapped directly in an opponent's face and received nothing. Zero. Not a warning, not a look. The ref shook her head and kept it moving. Then Kaylin McBride walked directly toward Bueckers, clapping, and again, nothing. No technical foul, no warning, no consequence whatsoever. Two scandals, one pattern. And that pattern has a name. Caitlin Clark is being targeted, and the people who are supposed to protect the integrity of this game, both on the court and in the media, are either enabling it or actively defending it. Now I want to walk you through exactly what happened on that ESPN broadcast, because the details matter enormously, and the conversation that TV refuses to have is the one that actually tells you the truth about where this league stands right now. Nneka Ogwumike sat on that panel and began discussing the Alyssa Thomas and Caitlin Clark situation. A situation the entire basketball world has been watching with absolute fury. And instead of doing what any honest analyst does, which is acknowledge what happened clearly and call it what it was, Nneka Ogwumike chose to deploy a specific word. She said, and I want you to hear this clearly, she said that Alyssa Thomas plays on the edge, and that both Alyssa and Caitlin sometimes embellish at times in certain instances. Embellish. She said embellish. Let that sink in for a second. Embellish. On national television, with cameras rolling, knowing exactly what she was implying. There is no universe in which that word is appropriate in this context. When someone puts their fist into another player's throat, and that is what happened, that is what the footage shows, that is what the entire basketball-watching public witnessed in real time. There is nothing to embellish. Nothing. You cannot embellish a fist to the throat. You cannot embellish contact that the league itself acknowledged was serious enough to result in a suspension. A suspension that the transcript correctly identifies as something the league rarely does on a non-call. The league did not suspend Alyssa Thomas because of a freeze frame. The league did not act because of optics. The league acted because what happened was real, documented, and undeniable. And Nneka Ogwumike sat at that ESPN desk and tried to suggest Caitlin Clark might have been performing. This is the conversation TV refuses to have honestly. The establishment does not want you to sit with what that word choice actually means. Because the moment you do, the moment you really process the deliberate surgical decision to use the word embellish in connection with Caitlin Clark, the entire narrative that the old guard has been selling about this situation collapses. It reveals that the goal was never analysis. The goal was damage control. The goal was to soften the public's outrage, redirect the story, and protect the player who threw the punch by casting doubt on the player who received it. That is what happened on ESPN. That is what Nneka Ogwumike did. And it is a brutal, undeniable betrayal of what sports journalism is supposed to be. Then Sydney Colson, and I want to spend real time on this because Sydney Colson's contribution to this broadcast was arguably even more egregious. Sydney Colson sat at that same desk and offered the following argument for why the incident was not as serious as people made it out to be. She said that both players got up and kept playing. She said that because Caitlin Clark got up and continued competing, that was evidence the situation was not a big deal. Sit with that for a moment. Really sit with it. Sydney Colson's argument, delivered on national television, is that Caitlin Clark's toughness and professionalism, The fact that she got hit and kept playing instead of collapsing on the floor is somehow evidence that she was not actually hit hard. That is the argument. That is what was said out loud on ESPN in front of everyone. Think about what that framework does to Caitlin Clark. If she had stayed on the ground and made her pain known, the same voices would have called her soft. They would have said she was being a baby. They would have said she was flopping. She was seeking attention. She was not built for this league. But because she got up and kept competing, because she demonstrated the exact toughness and resilience that every analyst claims they want to see from players, Sydney Colson uses that toughness as evidence against her. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot punish a player for being tough and then also punish her for being soft. You have to pick one. But the old guard does not want to pick one, because picking one means acknowledging the truth. Caitlin Clark was hit, she handled it with class, and the people who were supposed to protect her, the referees on the court and the analysts on television, failed her. And then Sydney Colson went further. She suggested, and this is the part that made me stop the footage and rewind it because I genuinely could not believe what I was hearing. She suggested that the public outrage was driven by a freeze frame, that the reason people were upset was because a still image circulated and created a misleading impression. She used the words narratives created based off of a freeze frame. She said the league was reacting to the optics of an image. No, absolutely not. That is not what happened. People watched this game live. People saw this happen in real time. The footage exists, the full-speed video exists, the contact was visible at game speed to anyone paying attention. This was not a photograph that went viral and created a false impression. This was a documented incident that the league itself took seriously enough to issue a suspension. Something again that the transcript specifically identifies as rare and unique for a non-call situation. Sydney Colson looked into that camera and tried to rewrite what millions of people saw with their own eyes. That is not analysis. That is not journalism. That is cover. And the fact that it happened on a major national sports network, in prime time, without a single pushback from anyone else at that desk, tells you everything you need to know about how deep this protection runs. Now let's get to the referees, because this is where the undeniable mathematical on-court proof lives. And this is where the double standard stops being a theory and becomes a documented pattern. Paige Bueckers was captured on footage clapping directly in an opponent's face. Not once, multiple times, right in front of the referees. The referee was right there, the ref saw it, and the ref shook her head. No technical foul, nothing. Paige Bueckers clapped in someone's face on a WNBA court in front of a working official and walked away without consequence. Now I want every single person watching this video to ask themselves one question. One honest, ruthless, unavoidable question. If Caitlin Clark had done that, if Caitlin Clark had walked up to an opponent and clapped directly in her face, right in front of a referee, what would have happened? We know the answer. We know it because we have watched this league all season. We know it because the media machinery that surrounds this league has demonstrated, repeatedly and explicitly, that it holds Caitlin Clark to a different standard. If Caitlin Clark had clapped in someone's face, she would have had a technical foul called before her hands were back at her sides. And then she would have been on every show the next morning as an example of poor leadership, poor sportsmanship, and proof that she is not ready to be the face of this league. That is not speculation, that is the pattern. That is what we have watched play out all season long. And then, because apparently one instance of selective officiating was not enough to make the point, Kaylin McBride walked directly toward Paige Bueckers, clapping, in what the footage clearly shows as a confrontational, in-your-face gesture, walking toward her, clapping, directly at her, and the referees watched it happen and called nothing. No technical foul for Kaylin McBride, no warning, no consequence. The refs were present, the refs saw it, and the refs decided that clapping in someone's face is not a technical foul unless, apparently, you are Caitlin Clark. This is the glaring, catastrophic, absolutely indefensible reality of what is happening in this league right now. The rules are not being applied equally. They are not being applied consistently. They are being applied selectively, and the selection is not random. The selection is deliberate. The biggest star in the WNBA, the player who has done more to grow the visibility, the ratings, and the revenue of this league than anyone in recent memory, is being officiated under a different rule book than everyone else on that floor. And the people who should be screaming about this from their platforms, the analysts, the commentators, the former players who now sit behind ESPN desks, are instead showing up on national television to suggest that maybe Caitlin Clark embellishes, and maybe the whole thing was just a misleading freeze frame, and maybe because she got up and kept playing it really was not that serious. This is the betrayal. This is the part that makes this story so much bigger than any single incident or any single broadcast. Because what Nneka Ogwumike and Sydney Colson did on that ESPN segment is not just bad analysis, it is a signal. It is the establishment telling Caitlin Clark and telling every fan who watches this league that the protection is not coming, that the media is not going to hold the officiating accountable, that the old guard is going to close ranks and protect the narrative, no matter what the footage shows. And here is the thing that makes this even more ruthless and deliberate. The game in question was a back-to-back situation. The first game in that series had already ended with a heated confrontation, a point-off situation involving Wnba, Sophie Cunningham, and the kind of physical escalation that should have put every referee crew on high alert for Game 2. The officials knew. They knew going into that game that tensions were elevated, that this matchup carried specific physical risk, and that they needed to be hyper-vigilant. They knew all of that, and they still missed it. They still let the situation escalate, to the point where the league had to step in after the fact, with a suspension, a reactive measure that the league itself almost never deploys on a non-call. That is not a mistake. That is a failure of preparation, a failure of situational awareness, and a failure of accountability that the officiating establishment does not want you to look at too closely. I am going to put my name on this. The WNBA's officiating double standard around Caitlin Clark is not going to get better on its own. It is going to get worse before it gets better, because the media apparatus that should be applying pressure is instead providing cover. Nneka Ogwumike used the word embellish on ESPN. Sydney Colson argued that toughness is evidence of no harm. The refs watched Paige Bueckers and Kaylen McBride clap in people's faces and called nothing. All of this happened in the same window, in the same news cycle, and it is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. It is a deliberate, ruthless, soul-crushing pattern of selective enforcement and media protection that has one clear target. And Caitlin Clark, who got hit, got up, kept playing, and never once stopped competing at the highest level, is still out there doing the thing that the old guard said she could not do in this league. She is still there. She is still competing. She is still the most watched, most discussed, most impactful player in this league right now. And the establishment cannot stand it. The referees who watched Paige Bueckers clap in someone's face and said nothing, they are the problem. The officials who watched Kaylen McBride walk directly toward an opponent, clapping, and decided that did not warrant a technical foul, they are the problem. Nneka Ogwumike, who sat on national television and used the word embellish in connection with Caitlin Clark taking a fist to the throat, she is the problem. Sydney Colson, who argued that Caitlin Clark's toughness somehow diminishes the seriousness of what happened to her, she is the problem. And the broader media machine that gave these takes a platform without challenge or pushback. That machine is the problem. Caitlin Clark does not need protection from the narrative. She is already winning. She is already there, on the court, doing the work, carrying this league's visibility on her back while the people who run it and cover it argue about freeze frames. But she deserves to compete on a level floor. She deserves to play under the same rulebook as Paige Bueckers. She deserves to have analysts who will tell the truth about what happened to her, instead of inventing reasons why maybe she brought it on herself. That is not a controversial position. That is the baseline minimum that any professional athlete in any league should be able to expect. And right now in the WNBA, Caitlin Clark is not getting it. Drop your most honest take in the comments below. Is the WNBA's officiating establishment running a deliberate double standard against Caitlin Clark? Yes or no? I do not want it's complicated. I do not want both sides. Pick one. Commit to it. Defend it. Because the footage is clear, the pattern is documented, and the media's response is on tape. There is a side of this that is supported by evidence and a side that requires you to ignore what you watched with your own eyes. I want to know which side you are on, and I want you to put it in the comments right now. Hit the notification bell because the officiating inconsistency in this league is escalating, and every time a new game is played, there is new footage, new evidence, and a new reason to have this conversation. We are not done documenting this. We are just getting started. We will see you in the next video.